Hello and welcome to another fantastic episode of RfRx. My name is Eric Wells and I am the support group director for Recovering from Religion. And with me is my good friend and fellow volunteer, Kara Griffin. And she's a helpline with Recovering from Religion. Welcome, Kara.
Hey, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And welcome everyone else.
All right. So the first question, poll question that we had is, who founded the Amish? What was the name of the person that founded the Amish? Jacob Hutter, Jacob Amon, Menno Simmons, or William Penn? So those are who founded the Amish. Question number two, what is Rumspringa? Rumspringa refers to a period of time from the age of 16 or 17 until you get married inside the Amish religion. Or is it when Amish children turn 16, the rules change, they're encouraged to experiment and explore outside the world, then choose whether or not to become baptized members of the Amish religion? Or is it about having a fling with worldliness, which reminds Amish youth that they have a choice regarding church membership? Or finally, is Rumspringa a rite of passage, which the usual behavioral restrictions are relaxed so that Amish youth can acquire some experience and knowledge of the non-Amish world? Question number three, if you're a U.S. citizen, do you have a right to education? It's much better if you can see these visually, but the first answer is, are you kidding me? Everybody does. This is America. Question number two, is this a trick question? Or answer number two, I thought so until you asked. Now I'm not sure. Answer number three, of course, even undocumented immigrants have the right to go to public school. Or answer number four, nope, it is not a right. And then finally, question number four is, have you heard of Wisconsin v. Yoder? You can say, I've never heard of it. I have no idea of what Wisconsin versus Yoder is. I've heard of it from a family or a church member, or I've heard of it in a law school if you went to law school, or I heard of it in a class or at some other school that's not a law school. So Kara, tell us what RfRx is.
Well, aside from being the best time of the week on Mondays, it's mainly that. And what it is a series of online weekly talks that may be relevant to people in RfR. And it's where we get to hear from guest speakers every week to talk about interesting, important issues. And it's, of course, not meant to be a replacement for the online community or the support groups, but it is meant to be a complement to those, where we can hear some good advice and learn about coping skills and all sorts of things like that, hear inspiring stories, learn about different religious perspectives, and all sorts of other inspiring and interesting stories from all of our wonderful guests. And so that's what we're doing again this evening. And as always, any questions, comments, inquiries, ideas about future shows, death threats can be sent via email to rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And also, these are all recorded and they go up onto YouTube a couple of weeks after they're recorded. And so you can view all of the previous episodes on that as well on youtube.com/recoveringfromreligion. And Eric, why don't you tell us about what RfR actually is?
You bet I will. So Recovering from Religion, you have heard us say RfR, and the initialism stands for Recovering from Religion. And here at RfR, we have a mission statement. We are mission driven and we love it. Our mission statement is to offer hope, healing, and support to those struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. And that's a fantastic mission statement. And we have come up with a lot of programs over the years to kind of support the folks who are struggling with issues of doubt and non-belief. And so there kind of falls into three main categories these programs do: hope, healing, and support. And Kara, start us off. Tell us a little bit about what programs we offer to support the healing.
Absolutely. So the main thing that we do for healing is our helpline, which is something you can call into either by phone or by chatting in through our website, whichever one you prefer. We have agents that are trained to listen and support you. They're available 24/7, whether you call on the phone or chat online. Just go to recoveringfromreligion.org and you'll see the number there as well as the box to chat in. And that's for if Maybe you just need somebody to talk to. You're going through some issues, you're having questions, you're having doubts, you're dealing with some difficult issues that you'd like to get some resources about. And we have agents there who are going to listen to you with an empathetic ear. They're not going to be judging or criticizing or proselytizing or deconverting or anything like that. They're there to support you and to provide resources, which also we have a resources page available. If you would like to just go peruse that yourself, go to our website, recoveringfromreligion.org/resources, and we have tons and tons and tons of information available there for all sorts of topics. Whatever you might be dealing with, there's probably something there you can read about. So feel free to go check that out. And then, aside from healing, the second piece of our mission is hope. And what we do to provide hope is we provide personal stories, sharing and listening to other people's experiences, to hear about their struggles that they've gone through, to hear inspirational stories from them. Kind of the idea behind this is that this is something that we're all in together, and we can definitely learn from each other, be inspired by each other, and be supported together by sharing in these experiences. And so we offer a blog and a podcast towards that end. And you can view our blog at medium.com/excommunications. And our podcast is also available through our website, recoveringfromreligion.org/podcast. And also, just to let you know, the podcast has all of the RfRx shows on it. We're all caught up now, so you can hop on there and view any of our previous ones that you want to check out, or watch them again. It's okay to rewatch. I do that all the time as well. You learn new things every time, or if you're me, you do. So how about support, Eric?
Yeah. I'm so grateful you let me talk about the support aspect of Recover From Religion. This is my favorite part. I think that longtime audience members here, longtime folks and friends here know how passionate I am about the support group program. And we have that here at RfR. The peer support groups are a fantastic program to help with folks who are looking for and needing some of that long-term healing. Now, this isn't professional support. This is all peer support. And as you can imagine, I was one of the support group leaders for a long time. And as you can probably tell by now, I am by no means a professional at mental health work. But we have well over 60 support groups around the world. And it's just fantastic. I'm so incredibly awed at how quickly the programs have grown. These are face-to-face meetings where we get to share about our trauma, share about what's been bothering us, and share about some of the things that have been coming up for us that have all stemmed back to our time in religion. And I've been deconverted now for well over 10 years, but I'm still finding stuff that pops up that I can trace back to my religious upbringing. And so these support groups the meetings are just really, really helpful for me. We got them all over the place, and take a look at the link in the chat or in the description, and you'll see the nearest one to you. Kara talked about the helpline, and I just talked about the support group program. Those are both peer support. And like I said, they're not professional support, but many times or sometimes we may need more than what just peer support can offer. And so another one of the programs we've set up is the Secular Therapy Project. And this is a directory where I, as a client, can create an account and search for a local secular therapist, and whether it's in my town or a certain radius, or even in my state, I can be assured that the therapists that I find and connect with through the Secular Therapist Project have been vetted to make sure they have the appropriate licensing in their state or their country, to make sure that they maintain a secular practice. And so you won't run the risk of being proselytized to. And they're also vetted to make sure that they run evidence-based treatments as well. So you can create an account and sign up and look for local secular therapists near you if that is something you need at seculartherapy.org. Now, the other program that we've got is, we've talked about healing and hope and support, but there's a community aspect to this that many folks find very, very helpful. And so we call that the Recovering from Religion online community. And this is a place where we're able to meet and connect with people who may be struggling with some very specific, similar things that I am, perhaps. We have channels. It's a Slack. We're using Slack, and we have channels in there for the LGBTQ community. We have channels in there for military, both current and former, any imaginable ex-religion. We also have those channels specifically in there. Secular parenting is one of them. So if I personally don't have kids, I'm not gay or anything like that, and so I don't have the same. I can't fully relate to folks who are struggling with secular parenting or struggling coming out of religion and being gay as well. And so these channels is where you can meet with folks who are have gone through or are struggling with the same thing and connect with them. This Slack channel isn't something that's publicly accessible, and so we screen folks to make sure that they're right fit for the community. So if that's interesting, if that interests you, reach out to the helpline, whether over the phone or chatting through the website, and they'll ask you a few questions. And if you're a good fit, they'll send you an invite to it. Now, in addition to that, if you're looking for a community of non-believers that looking for some new friends and some great people, I'd recommend the Atheist Community of Discord, because right now they are streaming this very show into that Discord channel. And so I would recommend that. I'm going to drop a link to that, the ACD and the chat, and you can join if you're looking for that. All right, volunteering. Kara, tell us about volunteering.
Yeah, absolutely. So going back to that other mission piece of healing, a lot of our members who are volunteers have found that healing can also come from helping other people. And volunteers pretty much run RfR. Every one of the services that you just heard about from both of us, whether it's the support groups or the helpline or any of those things, those are all done by volunteers. This is 100% a volunteer-based organization. We run on volunteer time and donations and everything like that. So we always have a need for new volunteers for all of those things we talked about. So if any of the services that we provide sound like something that you might be interested in working with or helping out with, or you have some skills that you might be able to offer, then please, by all means, get in touch with us about that. On our website, recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer, you can find a page that talks about the ways that you can volunteer and what you need to do to get started. There's a screening process as well for that, where someone will interview you and talk to you, and all that information is there for you to look at. But we absolutely are always in need of people's valuable skills. And we also provide training too. So for example, all of our helpline agents go through a fairly rigorous training process where you learn about how to engage in empathetic active listening and how to support people and provide resources and everything like that. So we don't just throw you to the wolves. We do provide training for that kind of thing. But if any of those things do sound like something that speaks to you that you'd like to help out with, we are definitely interested in hearing from you. And also, if you have skills that you think might be valuable that we haven't mentioned above, please let us know. We're always in need of, whether maybe you have technical skills, you can help us, with any of our online platforms, maybe project management, whatever it is. We probably have a place where you can help out. So please feel free to check into that if the spirit moves you, as it were. So we're going to drop that link in the chat as well. And then we've been going on with our introduction for quite some time now. So let me tell you a little bit about the format of our show. As always, we take about an hour to have a discussion with our guest speaker. And during that time, if you have any questions or anything like that, well, questions, put them in the chat box. And we will be collecting those throughout the talk to ask to the speaker. Eric and I both will do that from the Zoom chat as well as from the Discord. Eric is monitoring that as well. So type in your questions and we'll collect those to ask at the end. And we usually do question and answer for about 20 minutes or so. And then we have some closing thoughts at the end from our organizational leadership. I believe it's going to be Dr. Ray today. And then we move into, at the end of the show, some people's very most favorite part, which is the hangout session. And that is where we turn off the recording. Nothing else is being recorded. And we just get to hang out and talk amongst ourselves about whether it's the topic that we discussed this evening or whatever else comes up. That's kind of our informal chat and hangout session. And sometimes our guest speaker is able to stay for a little bit of that and also talk individually with people. We'll see how it goes. And that goes on sometimes for quite some time. And we have our fabulous social hangout hosts that host that and help keep everybody on track. And also, I just want to give a shout out as well to our troll smashers that are here as well, helping us moderate throughout the show. So thank you so much for keeping everyone in line. Y'all are usually a pretty well-behaved bunch, so, but you never know.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to Torah Bontrager. And she escaped in the middle of a night at the age of 15 so she could go to high school and from her formerly Amish community. She is the author of Amish Girl in Manhattan, and to her knowledge, she's the first female Amish escapee to graduate from the Ivy League. Her story has been featured on MTV and Forbes.com, among other places. Today, she advocates for the right of Amish children to go to school beyond the 8th grade. And Torah has also founded the Amish Heritage Foundation, which we're going to be talking about in an upcoming episode. And the Amish Heritage Foundation focuses on making education a federal right and overturning the Supreme Court case, Wisconsin versus Yoder. So Torah, welcome.
Thank you.
You in your bio, you hinted at like a really fascinating story about leaving in the middle of the night. We had on here earlier this month, Nathan Phelps, who left the Westboro Baptist Church in the middle of the night when he turned 18. And it sounds like you did something similar, but much earlier in life than he did. So do you mind telling us a little bit about your story?
Yes. So I had to, even though as an American citizen, I was born in the United States of America, I had to literally flee in the middle of the night just to have a chance at going to high school and college. And that's not usually what people think of when they think of America, even whether you're, a mainstream American or a member, a citizen of another country. But I had to do that in order to go to school past the 8th grade, and also just to flee other kinds of abuses that I was subjected to. And we can go into those if you want to in terms of constitutional rights. Like, I won't even cover human rights. We're just going to talk about constitutional rights.
So you're born into an Amish community. I would imagine you don't just walk into it and become a part of it. You were born into this. And what part of the U.S. was this in?
This was in in the Midwest in Iowa. I was born in Iowa, so the heartland of America. My family moved to Wisconsin when I was 3 years old, and then to Michigan when I was 10 years old, between 10 and 11 years old that year. And so this was middle America. This wasn't Pennsylvania, which is usually what is associated with the Amish in pop culture. It was definitely, Midwestern, what you think of as the real America.
The breadbasket almost in some sense.
Yeah, definitely. Like Wisconsin before California, Wisconsin was, the dairy, state, or technically still is, but definitely where we get our cheese and milk and all of that from.
So something, so you were living in an Amish community, and and from what I can imagine, like that's all you knew. Did you have any exposure to the outside world at all while you were in it?
Yes, one of the things to understand about the Amish is that we're not physically separated from the rest of the world. So it's not like the Hutterites, which falls under the Anabaptists umbrella. We can talk about that a little bit more later. But we actually live in rural America with no physical barriers. We have non-Amish neighbors. Anybody who's not Amish is, called English, and from our point of view, our perspective, you're English if you're not Amish. Yeah.
We're not even American.
No. Yeah, that's a very, very interesting thing to be aware of, is that we do not think of the rest of the world as anything but English. So, whether you are from China and speak Chinese, or from, anybody in the rest of the US and not Amish, you're English.
Now, where does that come from? Why is that term is used?
Well, it's a way for us from the inside as Amish practitioners to distinguish ourselves from the rest of the world. So our attempt as someone who is born inside the Amish religion and is obligated to remain practicing the religion the rest of our lives, that's a way to mark that non-physical barrier. And that's also why, as someone who is born Amish, speaking the language is such an effective non-physical barrier. So if the language weren't there, the boundary would be a little bit more blurry.
We've had quite a few of these religion spotlights, and one of the common threads is how the adherents see the rest of the world as other, and they seem to paint it as a scary, scary place, and you can only be safe, you can only be happy within this religious community. And what you described right there seems to hint at that. Growing up, did you feel that the outside world was a scary place? Were you kind of taught that it was other? Yeah. Yes.
Everything not Amish is the devil's playground. That's the phrase that's used, is the devil's playground. And but it gets a little murky though when you get older, especially once you're baptized. You understand that the devil's playground doesn't extend to anyone who's an offshoot of Amish or Mennonite who's conservative enough that they wear that the women wear caps on their head, and that there are no women in leadership, such as clergy.
Wow.
And you can actually transfer your church membership. You can join another church that's an offshoot of Amish or super conservative Mennonite without getting into trouble with the Amish church. But that's not something that you, depending on the community you come from or the family you come from, that you know about when you're not baptized. It's only something that's disclosed to you after baptism. Again, depending on what. So it gets a little murky. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah.
So there's this sort of, belief and training that if you're born, in the Amish church, it's your duty, obligation to remain Amish, practicing Amish for the rest of your life, unless you join certain select offshoots or Mennonites.
And so for you, kind of growing up and before you ran away at midnight, what were some of the first couple of cracks in your the worldview you kind of were born with, or you were given? Like what caused you to kind of second guess what you were being taught?
One of the questions I had that couldn't be answered to my satisfaction was why can't we have a car? Why can't we drive a car, but we can pay someone else to drive for us?
Oh,
Ah. So it was almost
wow.
like it's okay to do these things as long as it's one of the people that's already in the out group that's in the devil's playground. They can take the responsibility for it, but if you're noticing you're still benefiting from it, did it feel a little bit hypocritical? Is that?
Yes, I love that you brought up that word hypocritical. That was a word that I latched on to, was that this is very hypocritical. And an interesting sort of side note is that I wasn't taught that word. I read the dictionary at like in the 7th and 8th grades from cover to cover just to expand my vocabulary, and found that word.
Wow.
Oh, interesting. Now, was
Yeah.
this something that was frowned upon? Like when you were reading to educate yourself? I know some of the other people that we've spoken to coming out of these kind of religions, have talked about, their sort of religious community trying to stop them from gaining any additional knowledge that wasn't being provided to them and sanctioned by the church leaders. Was that the case for you as well?
Yes, there was definitely a certain there was a censorship depending on what community you grew up in. I was fortunate enough to be born into a community that, although it was on the strictest end of the traditional Amish, allowed me to read what would be considered classic American and British children's literature, for example. The Boxcar Children, Anne of Green Gables, a very like 50-ish sort of books that you would read in public school. And the schools in the on towards the more modern end of the spectrum, that are the smaller communities, not necessarily the larger communities, they tend to be more censored. It's almost as if the more they allow you to have material conveniences like indoor bathrooms and cell phones and bicycles, the more they have to compensate by censoring certain kinds of books. And
Wow.
so from 1st through 4th grade, I had a super conservative experience, but with access to the public library and access to basically the public sort of curriculum of books to read in terms of English literature. And then from the 5th to 8th grade, that switch when we moved to Michigan, where it was a super small community, more liberal in terms of modern conveniences, but very censored in terms of the Amish school curriculum.
Ooh, that must have been a shock. Now, speaking of books, is there a particular holy book that is normally read by the Amish, or a series of books?
That is a very interesting question, again, which I love, which you would never get unless it comes from an Amish insider, the real answer.
Ooh.
So in terms of a holy book, we're Christian, Protestant version of Christianity, but a very extreme fanatical interpretation of it coming out of the Protestant Reformation of 1525. And anyone who knows their history a little bit will know that happened in 1525 with Martin Luther, who nailed these theses on the Catholic Church door, proclaiming blah blah blah, essentially that you should have give the church sermons in the lay person's language instead of Latin. And fast forward to how the Amish came about. We're under the Anabaptist umbrella, and Anabaptist is essentially means that we don't believe that infant baptism is valid. And the only baptism that is valid is if you were baptized as a consenting, knowledgeable adult.
It this baptism thing really seems to be a big sticking point between like all sorts of the siblings of Christianity. I mean, the more I learn about the different bits of Christianity and why they split up, more often than not, it's because of the baptism thing. Like what, you can't get baptized as a child, or if you get baptized once, you're always going to go to heaven, or something like that. This is such a big sticking point and confusing point for people in the Christian religion. That's so interesting.
Yeah. So speaking of which, or if you already mentioned this, I'm sorry, but had you already been baptized then by the time you started rethinking this? Or like, what age does that typically happen for people that they're considered old enough to decide to be baptized and make that commitment?
Another excellent question. You don't really have a choice not to get baptized. And that's one of the myths in popular culture, that Rumspringa means that you have an actual choice. But Rumspringa is only today, 300-400 years later, is a definition of time. It's a period of time from age 16 or 17, depending on the community you're living in, until you get married inside the religion. And you are expected to get baptized. What happens during that time is going to depend again on the community you're living in. Like, how much are the baptized members, the clergy, going to look away and sort of like just give you some leeway if you break the rules, with the understanding that you're eventually going to sow your wild oats and return to the fold, right? Or become a baptized member. Other communities that are, and that will happen more in the larger, older communities, where I liken it to, if you live in New York City, there's hundreds and hundreds of teens, and you have a lot harder time controlling them than if you live in a little small community in rural America with 100 people as your population. It's a lot easier to control the teens. And so the community that I grew up in really strictly monitored the teens. I would never have been able to drink and party and so forth once I turned 16. So I knew, and there's also a lot of pressure to get baptized, even younger. So in the older, bigger communities, generally speaking, lots of kids don't get baptized until right before marriage, because you cannot get married until you're baptized.
Whoa,
Oh,
really?
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. So,
and yeah, go ahead.
So Rumstringer is like the time between the age of 16 and you get married, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the average age do you feel like the Amish get married?
It depends again on the community that you live in. The smaller communities that are more on the liberal end in terms of modern conveniences, like phones, bicycles, and so forth, they tend to try to get their youth to get baptized younger.
Okay.
And they specifically left the big communities to start up small communities and restrict the small communities to around 30 families in order to keep control over the teenagers, the unbaptized members. And the bigger communities, bigger and older, tend to, again, it depends on whether it's an older, bigger community that's conservative or more liberal. The more conservative communities, they usually, again, marry young, 20, 21, something like that. The older ones who are bigger and more liberal might even now, depending on the community, be in their mid-20s for the women, for the girls, and perhaps even in the early 30s for the men. So there's a disparity between the age of the girls versus the boys.
Wow.
Mhm.
Because even in the older communities that are more lenient and more modern, or especially more lenient, because lenient and modern doesn't necessarily go together. The boys will always have more latitude than the girls.
Someone brought up in the chat an interesting question. Are these arranged marriages, or how are people selecting their marriage partners, or are they selecting their marriage partners?
It's not arranged. So technically, there's no arranged marriage happening. That's not traditional Amish custom. But depending on who your parents are, if you're a girl, you would not be able to get the permission to get married without your parents' permission. Whereas if you're a boy, then again, there's that, disparity. There's that difference there, that the boy would be allowed, would not have the same barriers that the girl would, because women are literally second-class citizens, inferior to men.
This again, we talked about the religions creating a sense of like tribalism, like, and everything else is bad, but this misogyny too is a really common theme in all of these other religions as well. And I'll be honest, Torah, I'm so grateful to have a woman to come on and talk about it from the woman's perspective, because I know if I went through it as a man, I wouldn't fully be able to understand how the women experience this. So this is great. I'm really glad you're willing to talk about this.
Thank you. I'm glad someone's happy to hear this, because you touch on something that's an issue, which is part of my work, is to correct the Amish narrative in pop culture, which has been constructed by males who are not Amish for the most part, but who are adjacent, like Mennonite or offshoots of Amish, and you just don't hear the women's voice, or an educated woman's voice, just because of the disparity that happens.
Yeah, it almost sounds like they want to prevent that from happening. If you're prevented from being educated, then you can't comment.
Yep. Yeah.
Let's get to we'll get to the pop culture stuff a little bit later. But I think we didn't hear what the holy book was.
Good. I'm glad you came back to that.
Yeah.
Yes, I was going to bring that up. And you're amazing at keeping this on track, Eric. I appreciate it. So the holy book is in its Christian Protestantism is the umbrella that it falls under. But the Old and New Testament, the Bible, is the King James version in English. That's the only version that is considered acceptable in English, and in German it's Martin Luther.
So there's an entirely different Bible, like a Martin Luther version, like of the Bible.
Well, it's supposedly the same version. but the translation in German is Martin Luther's translation from 1520. Martin Luther from 1525 from the Reformation, and then the English translation is King James.
Now this may be getting a little too deep into the weeds here, but I mean, do you or anyone you know have you compared those versions? Are they in fact what you would consider to be identical? I mean, it's kind of a loaded question, but
yeah, I was not able at age 11 to really discern the difference, and the issue was, I mean, at age 11 was when I read the Bible from cover to cover in English, and I don't understand German. We are taught, depending again on what school you go to, what Amish school you go to, you're taught German, but it's only to read the Bible and regurgitate. It's not to speak. So our language that we speak is not German, is not standard German, it's Amish. It's its own language, and meets the socio-political criteria to be its own language, even though etymologists or those who are not Amish, who are claimed to be experts in the Amish, will not recognize that we speak our own language. They'll say, oh, it's a dialect of German. But that's, again, a whole other issue that I am working on as part of my life's work to establish. We have our own language. I mean, authentic linguists agree. And so anyway, all of that to say that for us to attend as children Amish church, if most of the service, depending on who the minister or bishop is delivering the sermon, is, you know, just regurgitating German Bible verses, and we can't understand that as children.
That's no different than having the service in Latin, isn't it?
Exactly. So that is one of
What?
my arguments, is that 300-400 years later, the Amish church is no different from the Catholic church that the Amish rebelled against back in the Reformation.
That seems silly to me, but I think that's a bad judgment on my part. But
and then before I forget it, no, I agree with you, Eric. Before I forget it, I just want to add that the Amish church does have, as its traditional stance, includes the Apocrypha, at least in German.
you're kidding me.
Oh.
Not necessarily in English, because when you buy the King James Version of the Bible, it doesn't necessarily include the Apocrypha. But in German, if you buy the Martin Luther version of the Bible in German, that German version, it includes the Apocrypha, which is exactly in the middle of the Old and New Testament. So there's the Apocrypha.
Yeah. So real quick, what is the Apocrypha? You said it's like additional books that you don't find in your normal run-of-the-mill King James Version. Like, what books would you find in the Apocrypha?
It would be in English Tobit, Tobit, in German Tobias is the book of Tobit or Tobias. I believe another one is the book of Esther. I would have to look and see, but the reason I remember Tobit specifically is because that is actually the story of Tobit is recited during Amish marriage ceremonies.
Yeah.
And that's the most obvious reference to the Apocrypha. And again, that's not going to be, might not even be mentioned in the more liberal but censored smaller Amish communities, where they think, oh, well, the Apocrypha is actually, it's too superstitious and we shouldn't include that anymore.
Now, I remember as a kid how boring it was to be in church on a Sunday, and every now and then I'd get smacked because I'd start to fall asleep. But I understood English, and that's how the sermons were given. If you're telling me that the sermons in the Amish church were given in German, and as a kid there'd be no hope for me to not fall asleep, to stay awake. What was it like for you as a kid going every Sunday or is the Holy Day on a Sunday? I'm just kind of making an assumption here.
Yes. So the Holy Day is on Sunday. God created the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh day, which is Sunday. But we only go to church every other Sunday. So our excruciating 3-hour church service on hard benches with no backs, somehow, like we only have to endure it every 2 weeks and not every Sunday.
Our pews had cushions on them, and you're telling me that these are wood benches just like they would have had back in the 16th century?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yes. And it goes back to this underlying obvious and not so obvious theology or cult of martyrdom that underpins Anabaptism and the Amish in particular, like any forms of super conservative of Anabaptism.
Okay, so you're demonstrating your commitment by being uncomfortable for 3 hours, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you guys
again, you will never hear any practicing Amish person express this, and I would not have been able to express this, put this in words before I escaped, or even after I escaped. Shortly after I escaped, it took me a long time, to understand the psychology of what was happening.
Oh, so this is not something that is explicit then. They're not saying, yes, we know you're uncomfortable, children. The meaning behind this exercise is that we want you to, reflect on the sacrifices of Jesus, or anything like that.
No,
Huh.
no. This is all something that, again, points back to this idea that we need to be non-resistant, and that's an operative key word for Anabaptists, and especially Amish, which the Amish fall on the conservative spectrum of various Anabaptist groups. That the more we suffer, the more likely we are to get into heaven. It's not said that way out loud, but that's the way it plays out. And that's the psychology behind it. We don't understand psychology. We're only 8th graders at best.
Oh my
But that's what's
gosh.
going on. And
so
yeah,
even the adults have the 8th grade that's where they stop.
Yeah.
And so but they're running communities.
I know. Yeah. And even for myself, it took me years until I could frame it in those words, to put words around what the experience is, what the society is like, what the culture is like. We are 8th graders. We're a nation of 8th graders at best. The average practicing Amish adult has a 5th grade literacy level, English literacy level, not even German. Yeah. And a 3rd or 4th numeracy level.
Wow.
Yikes.
And so you put that on top of 350 to 400,000 people in America across 30 states or so, approximately 30 states. That's who we are today in the 21st century.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is this something that is talked about? I mean, do they give a reasoning behind, why they don't want education to progress past that point? What's the stated explanation here?
And in the beginning, when the Amish first immigrated from Europe, there weren't restrictions around education. The Amish children attended public schools just like everybody else, like all other immigrants, until especially in the 60s, it became evident in Wisconsin or in Iowa, for example. There were little uprisings against public school curriculums before that, but the most obvious case that you can see on the record is the so-called Amish Revolution in Iowa in 1965. And this was in Buchanan County, which is actually the community I was born into, was Buchanan County, Iowa, one of the oldest Amish communities and one of the strictest. And there had been pushback against the public school district off and on since maybe the 40s or 50s about what the kids were being taught in public school. But the public school, consistently made these accommodations in the interest of religious freedom exemptions for the parents, in terms of the kids weren't, being taught Darwin's theory, for example, or any other kinds of ideas or subjects that were contrary, to the Amish religion, to the parents' religious beliefs. And the kids would just sit out those classes or not be taught them by the public school teachers. And then in the 60s, in the state of Iowa, because of funding and so forth on the state level or federal level, the state started consolidating the school districts. and started moving, like busing children in from rural areas, from rural one-room schoolhouses, because everybody used to go to one-room schoolhouses in rural areas, into consolidated schools in the biggest town in the area, however the districting worked, right? And that's the point at which the Amish, particularly the Buchanan County Amish in this case, said, okay, we're not okay with our kids being in going into town, being taken out of the one-room schools and going into the public schools in town. And at that point, it was rare for non-Amish children to be in the one-room schoolhouses in Buchanan County, because Buchanan County was so big, and it just worked out that it was basically by default almost all, if not all, only Amish kids in the one-room schoolhouses, but they were still taught by non-Amish teachers. Certified teachers by the state were taught, because that's, how our government system works. They then said they're not fine with the kids. The Buchanan County Amish were split between, the community was split between some parents saying, we don't want our kids to go into the public schools to be taught, to be intermingling with the non-Amish kids, and others saying, well, we don't mind if they're continue to be taught by the non-Amish school teachers, as long as they're still in the one-room schoolhouses. And others saying, well, we need to install our own teachers, our Amish teachers, who aren't certified, who aren't educated past the Amish 8th grade. And so that was happening during the 60s. In 1965, the school board, the state of Iowa school board, decided that it's rightfully decided that children need to go to school past the age of 14. It was more the issue in Iowa was that they need to be educated at least by certified teachers until the age of 14. So the Amish had in that state, the state did have an exemption for kids who worked on farms after age 14, I believe it was. So it didn't matter if you were non-Amish or Amish, you could apply for that exemption. So the issue in Wisconsin was not like the same issue that was in Wisconsin, where we'll get to later. In Iowa, it was about whether the kids were being taught until at least age 14, until they got an exemption to work on farms, that they were taught by state certified teachers. And so in 1965, there was at least one schoolhouse in Buchanan County, Iowa. There was more than one, but one schoolhouse got the attention that went, where the state sent out school buses to this Amish one-room schoolhouse that was employing an Amish teacher that wasn't certified. And the school district had notified the parents the day before, or whenever it was, that, hey, we're going to send out the school bus to pick up the kids, take them into the school, the town school, the consolidated school, because you don't have a certified teacher installed. And the day that the school bus came out, along with some administrators, there was an AP Associated Press photographer or someone affiliated with the Associated Press on board. This was like a big event, who rode with the school board officials, and they came to this Amish schoolhouse, and they were going to load up the kids, and some of the parents were there waiting for the bus to arrive on the Amish school grounds. And when it did arrive, they said, "Spring, spring, spring to the Welschgenfeld, run to the cornfields," to tell the kids to run to the cornfield, literally run. And so they couldn't be loaded up on the school bus, couldn't be forced onto the school bus. And
So
that's where you have this photo that went viral. That was like the equivalent of social media during that day, that time.
Right.
And it also played into the martyrdom and innocence narrative.
Right.
You know, the theology of martyrdom that we Amish kids grew up with inside the church, and to outsiders, this narrative of innocence. Oh my God, the poor children, the poor innocent, harmless Amish. How dare you like put them on the school bus? But we have to remember that the children were never considered in this narrative. It was all about the parents, and the narrative that was spun was that this was a violation of religious freedom, but it was never acknowledged that the children also are US citizens with their own right to freedoms.
And it must have been scary for the children as well. Were they told, I mean, what story were the children given that they needed to, you know, flee into the cornfields for?
Well, that was something that they were prepped with beforehand, you know, already, you know, so this was something that was, it wasn't like the state of Iowa and the local school board weren't accommodating all along and hadn't been making religious freedom exemptions for the parents for years already. You know, that's not the case, which is always not acknowledged. It's always spun as if, oh, there were never religious freedom exemptions made beforehand. No, this had been happening for at least, you know, 20, 15, 10 years, something like that. And, but, you know, the children were all prepped. If you see the school bus, I mean, that's why there were parents, specifically fathers, on the school grounds that morning, waiting for the bus to come and ordering the children to run into the cornfields to avoid being put on the bus. And in that photo, supposedly that photo, one of the children is one of my uncles. I mean, we can never verify that because we only see the backs of the children running into the cornfield. But I'm just saying this to say I'm like very intimately connected to what led up to Wisconsin v. Yoder, the Supreme Court case in 1972, which then built on this event. And in Wisconsin, you know, got the Supreme Court at that point, like took it all the way up to the US Supreme Court to make this exemption for Amish, for the Amish religion, to not allow the children to go to school past the 8th grade.
Wow.
So that Supreme Court case now, that still stands, and that's the reason that they are not educated past the 8th grade?
Yes. Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. Wow. That case, in fact, because of what happened in 1965, like that was really now sort of like that was really the, you know, the breaking point. And because it went national and international, that incident, the Iowa public school, the state of Iowa, backed down because there was all this outrage from people, you know, letters coming in. So before social media, people wrote letters. And there are all these letters coming in to the superintendent of the local school district and, you know, to the state education board of Iowa about how dare you persecute these poor innocent Amish people, right? Basically was the sentiment. Wow. And so Iowa backed down. And before that, Iowa was rightfully advocating for the children. But they backed down from that outrage from the general public. And unfortunately, they didn't have anybody like me, you know, on the inside, or like, you know, the Amish Heritage Foundation saying, no, you need to stand your ground. You need to think about the children, right? So this then gave way to the Yoder case, Wisconsin versus Yoder in 1972.
And we'll go more in detail about the Wisconsin versus Yoder
Okay,
with the
yeah.
upcoming talk on the Amish Heritage Foundation itself, right?
Perfect.
This whole martyr thing is freaking fascinating to me because from the outside, I want to handle the Amish with kid gloves, but it seems like that's exactly what they want us to do. Like, just like, oh, they're quaint, oh, they're soft and fluffy, and they're not hurting anybody. It's not harmful at all. And just some of the things that you're bringing up already, I can already see my mindset shifting about them too. During the church meetings every other week, did you guys sing at all, or dance? Like, was that no-nos too? Because it's sounding like that's where this is heading. Like, no happiness at all for the most part.
We sang hymns that were written by the martyrs. in our church services every 2 weeks. Those were the hymns we sang, were written by martyrs, Anabaptist martyrs. And I want to add to our holy book, the non-biblical book that was considered next to the Bible was the Martyr's Mirror. And the Martyr's Mirror was a thick book of like 1,500 pages originally, that contains stories of Anabaptists or predecessors of Anabaptists who literally died at the stake, like were burned alive. Whoa. Literally, for not complying with the Catholic Church.
Wow. This runs deep.
Yeah, these are historical figures then from Europe.
Yes, from Europe. Yes.
Oh.
Like actual historical accounts. And just to give you a very brief background, in the 500s or something, I believe it was. Let me just see my notes. I believe it was in the 500s or so, and maybe even earlier. You were not allowed to go against the Catholic Church doctrines. And one of those things that you weren't allowed to do, it had something to do with being baptized by heretics that the Catholic Church considered heretics. So if you were baptized by them or baptized again by them, you were a heretic, and like literally by Roman law, like the Roman, and Catholic Church were like functioning as the same pretty much. That was punishable by death. And so that was still happening in the 1500s when the Protestant Reformation started. Like that law was still in place that you could not be baptized as an adult, which the Anabaptists held that. So the technical thing for the Anabaptists was that your infant baptism was never valid, and so technically we're not rebaptizers, which Anabaptist, the Greek word translation is rebaptizer, and the Anabaptists was to say, no, we're not rebaptizing. We never had a baptism in the beginning, and but in the eyes of the Roman Church and Roman Catholic Church and Roman law, they were still subject to heresy and death.
This baptism thing seems to be such a schism, and all-knowing, almighty God might have thought about that ahead of time and made it clear in one of the books, Old Testament, New Testament, like, okay, here is about the baptism, and this is clearly laid out, and then we wouldn't have had these schisms, and there'd be harmony and stuff. Just
well, Eric, don't you know it's very clear? It's just that everyone else is confused about it.
So the Anabaptist starts, and the Mennonites came before Anabaptists, and they were started by that
Menno
person?
Simons. Yeah.
Menno Simons.
So no, the Anabaptists were not before them. Well, the concept of Anabaptism was before the
Okay, got it.
Anabaptists, right? Anabaptists as a concept or term was by the Roman law, the
Yeah.
Catholic Church, right? And so they would say that Anabaptists, what became known as Anabaptists later on, were in violation of the law. Like, it was considered, the term Anabaptist was considered the same as like what we would consider communist or Bolshevik or socialist, that kind of like stigmatism and
So Anabaptist is like a concept, and then Mennonites is more
well,
this.
in Roman law and Roman Catholic Church law, it was an actual law. Like, you could not be
Wow,
baptized
it's that old.
again.
Wow.
If you were baptized again, like, you went against the law, whatever the church and government law was, right?
Yeah.
But the Anabaptists, how they see themselves, as how I was taught, was that it's only one baptism, right? So our definition version of the interpretation is we've only had one baptism. It's not rebaptism.
But I see what you mean, though. If it's a term that's being thrown around almost like, oh, you're communist or you're socialist, it doesn't matter if you don't technically qualify for the meaning of the term. It's something. It's the same as, you can call anything socialism, and a certain number of people are going to hate it because you put that label on it, regardless of whether it technically is or not.
Right. But the thing to understand is that this was an actual theological interpretation, like a point of contention between the Roman Church, Roman Catholic, and what then became the Protestant Reformation, or certain factions of the Protestant Reformation. And then this all arose out of Martin Luther. Was one of the lead people on this, and that then turned into factions under Luther, then developed into what is now known as Anabaptist, the Anabaptist umbrella today. And the people under the Anabaptist umbrella are Hutterites, Mennonites, and Amish, and a couple of other groups.
So the Hutterites and the Mennonites and the others, those are the ones that you mentioned earlier that other Amish people might say are okay, maybe they're kind of close enough. We don't consider them the devil's playground. They're sort of under the same umbrella, but maybe they're just, how are their beliefs like just a little bit different, or what is the distinction there?
So in terms of the Hutterites are more distant than from the Amish than the Mennonites are. So I really don't know that much about the Hutterites, except that their founder died in 1536, I believe it was. So I actually have a video. We created a video, like a 2-minute video, to kind of explain the mysterious origins of the Amish. One of them had to explain that. So Jacob Hutter, is the founder of the Hutterites, died in 1536. The Protestant Reformation took place in 1525. Menno Simons was born in 1496, I believe it was, and died in late 1500s after Jacob Hutter. And he was out of the Netherlands, and he was really the person who took this whole sort of like Anabaptist, what we see now as Amish theology, which is this idea that you can't, or Anabaptists in general now today, is you can't be baptized without consent as an adult. So that's sort of like the distinguishing theological stance, is that you need to be an adult to consent to being baptized. Now, what happened in 1493 or 1693 was Jacob Ammon, who was a Mennonite convert in what is now known as Switzerland and Germany, like that area. He decided that he was going to have a problem with some of the Mennonite theology interpretations, one of which included excommunication of members. So the Mennonites held that we are not going to say that people who help us and protect us from getting burned at the stake, from being persecuted, like even if they don't subscribe to our version of religion, Anabaptist version of it, if they protect us and help us, say if they're Quaker, for example, and they protect us from the authorities and keep us from getting persecuted, the Mennonites would say at that time that we think that they're probably going to heaven, right? Or they have an equal shot at getting into heaven, whatever it was. Whereas Jacob Ammon, the founder of the Amish, decided he has a problem with that interpretation, and that if you're not going to get into like you should be shunned or excommunicated. And excommunicated and shunned are two different terms. Excommunicated, you can only do that if you're a baptized member. You can whereas shunned, that can be applied to anyone, whether you're baptized or not. And so Jacob Ammon was super, super petty about that.
Sounds like it.
And he's like, no, I'm going to excommunicate you if you don't, it doesn't matter if you're a Quaker and you're sheltering us from persecution from the Catholic Church or even the mainline Protestant church, you're going to, you're not going to get into heaven, basically. Or if you leave the Amish or Mennonite at that time, Mennonite, faith, you're gonna definitely go to hell, even if you convert to Quaker and sympathize with us and protect us, something like that. So that's the upshot of what happened. And also, very interestingly, he made other very strict rules, including down to buttons and color and of your clothes and patterns of clothes.
Kidding me?
Yes.
That's
Wow.
the dress
So
code.
that's super Amish. Yes.
Wow.
So
what
until
were-
then, the Mennonites, Anabaptists, Mennonites, they look like everybody else. You wouldn't know. They didn't dress differently. So you wouldn't be able to, the Catholic Church or even the mainline Protestant church, however, as time evolved, they couldn't persecute you based on how you dress because you look like everybody else. But Jacob Ammon decided that you needed to dress a certain way, and now you became a target by the way you looked. And
Okay, now I've got to ask too, you've mentioned several times about how it's always, men making these decisions. How does that go for Amish women? Is there almost like a purity culture element to this? Is there a modesty thing happening? Who decides what the women and girls dress like, and how was that for you?
men decide.
Okay, I thought that was what you were
going
going to say.
Yeah, it goes back to Jacob Ammon.
Remember that in Islam, the Islam talk too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there isn't purity culture in the Amish in the way that there is in evangelical born again Christianity, the way that I've understood that that's happening, or people that have talked about it. I mean, there are in certain Mennonite, depending on the Mennonite community, that's really very much a thing. But in the very in the Amish purity culture, I mean, you're not supposed to have sex before marriage. So in that way, it could be called purity culture, but there isn't the purity rings and the purity balls and all of that kind of stuff. It's not. I would not call it purity culture. However, there's a false modesty kind of thing, where modesty equals how much of your boobs and ankles are covered. Supposedly clothes are, are an indicator of whether or not you, get assaulted, kind of thing.
It's one of those, then again, where the boys get away with whatever behavior they want and the girls are blamed.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly. 100%. It's always the girl's fault, always the woman's fault. It's never the poor, helpless boys or men's fault. Yeah.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Well, that's discouraging. So, well, let me ask you this then too. How about for people who are members of the LGBTQ community? What is that like if you're Amish? Is that something that you can even reveal, or is that accepted?
That's supposedly no one born Amish is LGBTQ plus.
Oh, of
Oh,
course.
I
Yeah,
think
that
that
makes sense.
social science would disagree with that statement.
Oh, but you forget we don't allow science.
Oh, that's right. If you don't learn it, it's not
Like
true.
that's of the devil. That's the devil's playground, science.
Got it. Got it.
Yeah, and so I know for a fact there are hundreds of closeted gay males, those born as males. I don't, or assigned males at birth. I There's got to be women as well, girls and women. But it's a lot harder for them to to really explore their own gender, sexuality, and so forth than it is for the men, because they don't have access to the outside, or like limited those freedom opportunities that the men do. And so I don't, I one of the things I want to do is do like do some research into how many of the girls who didn't get married are actually questioning or lesbian or otherwise LGBTQ. I suspect that might be a factor for some of them, and others, the women would not be able to express who they really are unless the husbands they married happen to be gay or LGBTQ. And I know that has been also, in rare cases, that has happened where a woman who finds out that her husband's gay, actually, and her children are questioning. But those are only because the woman has left the Amish church or somehow been able to get support outside.
Interesting.
Well, let's we're running a little short on time. We've got a lot of questions, but let's work on busting some myths about the Amish community, if you don't mind. When I think of Amish community, I think of quilts, I think of horse and buggies, I think of water pump, I think of what, that Witness, that movie, I think of those types of things. What's with the horse and buggy? It seems so quaint, but it also seems really, really dangerous too.
Yeah. Thank you. The religion says, in the traditional Amish, the defining, theological interpretation is that you cannot use motorized transportation. So you're not allowed to have motorized vehicles yourself, because that would be a bigger temptation to lead you astray. And so horses and buggies, it's harder, to drive into town and go partying
Okay.
when you have horses and buggies.
So the horses and buggies is almost like a leash. You can only go to the end of your rope as far as the horse and buggy can go.
Can you get an Uber? Is that also wrong?
Buggy Uber?
There are, I think, at least, in the big, huge, like, tourist communities, there are actually like buggy Ubers. Ubers. Like, that's part of their business. Not very, common, but yeah. So no, this is where it gets confusing for a child, is why can we pay someone to drive us around, who isn't Amish, but we can't drive ourselves around? Why are they not going to hell, or why are we enabling them to go to hell, were my questions.
Yeah, because it almost sounds like the thought process there is, well, they're going to hell anyway, so it's okay if we benefit, from their mistake.
Well, officially, the officially, Amish religion says we don't know whether or not they're going to hell. That's for God to decide, which I actually, agree with. Like, you can't judge, theoretically, on the books. That's the stance, is we don't know what's going to happen to them. But if you're born in the Amish church, it's your duty, obligation to remain in the church for the rest of your life, because that's your best chance at getting into heaven. But it's not even guaranteed. Although you actually can transfer to the Mennonites or an offshoot of Amish, as long as they don't allow women to preach, to be clergy members. There's this little sidebar exemptions that you don't know about until you get baptized.
Yeah. But of course, it's, you got to keep the women in their place. That's the main number one thing.
Yeah.
Now, now you said something interesting, though. So this baptism hubbub that's going on, it sounds like even if you do the baptism right, that's not guaranteeing that you're going to go to heaven.
Yeah. So the Amish, two things I appreciate about the religion is there's no proselytizing. That's strictly forbidden. But of course, it's because we don't want outsiders to influence our children and lead them astray, right? So it sounds like a good thing on the surface, but that's the motivation, or the motive. And then the other thing is, we're not guaranteed a slot in heaven at all. So every day we live in fear, at least I did, going to sleep at night, literally praying to God, please don't let me die tonight. I don't want to go to hell.
Wow.
So it's no matter what you do, it's just a question mark. You don't know whether you're going to make it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. For sure, if you leave the fold or you don't transfer to a sanctioned offshoot or Mennonite, community, you will go to hell. That's for sure. But even if you do everything right, there's no guarantee that you're going to get into heaven.
Wow.
Yikes. That is unsettling.
One of the things I think of when I think of the Amish is that it's only in the US, and we're talking about Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. But I'm seeing here in the chat, there's some folks in Canada, and you mentioned the Hutterites, which I think there's a lot of Hutterites in Canada as well. Is this a growing religion, or is it just new members are born? Is that how it works, or are they expanding into other countries outside of North America?
So the Amish, traditional Amish, are only in the United States and Canada. There are people in other countries like Australia, for example, who claim to be Amish, and it's a total lie. They're capitalizing on the myth and the marketing of it, which is just horrendous. I mean, that's a whole other topic about the popular culture,
a knockoff
the
Louis
co-opting.
Vuitton or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And there are people who claim to be experts on the Amish, who are not Amish, say that the Amish are the fastest growing population in America, fastest growing minority group in America. I disagree, because we're equally dying off. We're not allowed to marry outside the Amish church. So if you're a practicing Amish person, there's no proselytizing, hence no converting into the Amish. I mean, it's very rare that people convert into the Amish, because it's so hard to do and not, welcomed. And then you're not
so
allowed.
There is a pathway for someone like me to become Amish?
I mean, that's a possibility, exactly, but it's highly discouraged. Like, you're never going to get recruited, you're never going to get proselytized to.
Oh, wow.
No, what I'm saying is you're not going to, no Amish person is ever going to approach you. No practicing Amish person is ever going to approach you and say, convert, come and join our church, our religion. That's never going to happen. That's against the Amish religion to do that. But if somebody from the outside who's not Amish says they want to convert to the Amish church, the traditional church, and they keep at it and they're persistent, eventually, they will find some community, some church that will say, okay, we'll accept you. But only after lots of trials and tribulations, depending on where you're at. So there are converts into the Amish religion, very rare, but it does happen. And the thing about, so back to whether or not the population is growing, is yes, it's growing if the Amish are having more kids than they used to. So we know just based, or if the lifespan is longer than it used to be. So we know just in mainstream America, the population, the age lifespan of people is longer than it used to be in the 1800s, for example. Average, I believe. You can fact check this, right?
And child mortality is way, way, way down.
Right, because of, better doctors, better science, right? Science is keeping you alive.
Except 2020 and 2021, a lot of folks died off because they didn't get the vaccine. Wear masks.
Exactly.
Which brings me to a question. What is that like in the Amish community as far as vaccines or even just, other kinds of medical treatments? Are they benefiting from advances in medical science that would lead people to live longer?
Yes,
I'm
absolutely. The Amish religion doesn't have Amish religion doesn't have any restrictions around medicine, modern medicine.
Don't you need science for that?
Yes, that's again why it gets so confusing. It's the same rationale why you can pay someone to drive you around who's not Amish.
Oh, so you can pay a doctor or a hospital if you get sick.
Yes. Yeah. Now, what happens is that the Amish are not going to have you on life support generally. Like if you go into a coma, you're probably going to have the plug pulled pretty quickly. Because one of the beliefs is, well, it's your time to die. There's a sort of acceptance around death as a fact that is sort of avoided in mainstream America, which I appreciate. It's like, that's just part of the life and death cycle, is you die at some point. But the other thing is that the religion forbids insurance, and so you literally cannot. You can't afford life support.
Wow. Oh wow.
So that's that. You don't have the means to keep your loved one on life support. And so if that were not a restriction, I don't know what what would happen in such cases, like that. But back to general, medicine, there's no restriction around medicine. And
so the buggies are uninsured.
There's a lot to say about the situation with the buggies and the dangers and also child labor. That's a whole other topic. We can go into that some more with the foundation spotlight, I think. So remind me. We can definitely go into that. Yeah.
Yes.
So if no new converts are really coming in, this sounded like, and from the way you're describing it, the people who started this and immigrated into Canada and the United States were white Europeans. Are there any Amish of color or other? Is it just a white man's type of group?
So it's white European, traditionally white European. The only people of color that you will see are those who have been, the very few who have been adopted or converted in. Now, I don't know of anyone who's converted in who's not white, although that doesn't say that there haven't been. I do know of at least some who are of color who were adopted, and adoption only happens in very rare cases, and it would be because of infertility reasons.
Now, so what about when you're leaving the religion? Are there any special challenges that you would encounter then? Like, what happened in your case after you left? Are you still in contact with your family, or if that's something you feel comfortable talking about? But what are the things that might happen to someone that does decide to leave?
I'm not in contact with my birth parents. They, yeah, just it's always a a crapshoot whether or not your parents at some point will tolerate or accept you. It really depends on the community you're in, what the community sort of level of acceptance or tolerance is around that. And also, just your parents, their personality. Mine was, they absolutely, particularly my father, just, will not, I'm the devil. I'm 666.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I tried for a number of years, like over 10 years, to have like some sort of, like, I thought I could fix it, and that was part of my trauma therapy journey, and all of that is thinking, oh, I could fix it. I could have parents who loved me and accepted me, even though, I didn't agree with the religion. And I would go back and visit every so often, because I also wanted my siblings to know, first of all, they had an older sibling for the ones who were born after I escaped. And I wanted them to know, I'm a good person. I'm not evil and going to hell, which is the only narrative they got when I wasn't there. And so yeah, I finally realized that it was a one-way street. It was never going to change. And it wasn't until, once I wrote my memoir, that I really uncovered, through intensive therapy and all of that, once I was in my late 20s, early 30s, that I realized all the dynamics that were happening with the parental abuse and emotional abuse and psychology of all of that, and realize, oh yeah, there's no way that I could ever fix it. And so the interesting thing on top of all of that was my father decided it was okay for him, and he, of course, my mother did whatever he said to do, to exit the religion. They resigned from the Amish church about 5 years after I did. I see Glenda's expression. Like, yeah, I didn't know. I visited one time during a break from school, and there's like my father and some of my siblings in a car picking me up, and he's driving the car, and nothing was ever said about anything. Oh yeah, like it was just like that's how it's like to be Amish.
So it's almost like it doesn't have to make sense. I know a thing I got in, not Amish, I grew up in Southern Baptist evangelical fundamentalist, but there was a common refrain that was, you don't have to understand it, just accept it. Yep. That almost sounds like what I'm hearing there, where you're just not to question what's being done.
Yes, absolutely. You're not supposed to question ever anything. You're supposed to just do whatever those in authority say to do, which is males and the clergy.
Wow.
Well, that would be a big challenge of kind of seeing the world anew and learning how to build up your own autonomy and understand that. And we also talked about education coming out of Amish, that in some sense you're stunted at the 8th grade level. If you're coming out as an adult, how are you possibly prepared for getting a job to earn a living? And is there a language challenge too when people come out of the Amish communities?
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you asked about that. My first language is not English. ich schwätze Amish. So any apples ist das und was ist kann mich für mich notice. That's
I know German and I can barely understand that. It's like, it's just like it's so far off. It's that is so unique. Wow.
yeah. So I was just saying, anybody who's watching this can get a hold of me later. And it's just not something. I can't have a conversation in German, and Amish is not a written language, it's only spoken.
Oh my gosh, it doesn't have an alphabet or anything like that.
Wow. So that's why you were saying earlier you learned to read English or German, but not necessarily to speak. So you're speaking actually a different language than what you're reading and writing in.
Yes. Well, we're writing in English. Here's the very interesting, again, these interesting, weird things that do tricks with your brain, especially for a child, is anything English is bad, right? Like that's the outside world, but we communicate amongst ourselves in the English language because our Amish language isn't written. So
and I mean, I'm understanding that there is enough of an education that people within even Amish school system are aware that, I guess, the rest of the world is not all called English by the rest of the world, that represents a smaller segment. Or is that
we don't necessarily know that. No.
Oh.
No, we don't know that necessarily, that someone from China is Chinese and not English.
Oh my God, the world is that small to you?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
So do you learn this? I may be getting off in the weeds here again.
Isolated.
I'm sorry. But do you have like I think of like going to school in elementary school and there's like, pictures on the wall and maybe a world map or a globe. Like, do you learn geography or world history, or how does that fit into this worldview?
It depends on the school you go to and on the teacher. So depending on the school you go to, what the curriculum is, what you're taught is of course laid out by that specific church clergy, the rules or law of that specific church. And then it comes down to the personality of the teacher herself, usually a girl. 99% of teachers are girls and not boys or men. And lots of schoolhouses, Amish schoolhouses, have a globe sitting there, but you're not necessarily taught geography or world. Like you will, depending again on the school, like you might be taught the states, but not the rest of the world. But you might have like some books from holdovers or crossovers from the public school system in the library, in the Amish school library, that you can go read if you have that initiative, self-motivation to do it, which I did. And so I would look at the globe, I would read all the books, and I learned 1970s geography. And so I learned all the countries and the capitals on my own of countries that didn't exist after the Soviet Union fell. Like I didn't know USSR, like what were those countries called after the Soviet Union.
Wow.
And some children, even today, as recently as several months ago, someone came to me and didn't know where Canada was, even though the state they lived in bordered Canada.
This is like The Handmaid's Tale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
Well, I think we could talk for hours about this. One final thing before we go on to just a few questions. So, I was never Amish. I'm not in the Amish, but if I come across someone who's kind of transitioning out of the community and the religion, what are some tips on how best I can support them and be there for them?
Well, point them to the Amish Heritage Foundation.
Okay, absolutely.
And
Step one.
that's step one. And of course, I love Recovering from Religion, the peer support groups, and what you do, which is such a perfect alignment of what what my work is, and the Amish Heritage Foundation's work is to provide that kind of peer support. So that's definitely much needed. But I think that for someone to know that there's another person who left the Amish religion, that's always going to be step one, to be able to connect to someone who's safe and who will give them objective information. And I would say, like, just let them know there's somebody there to help. You're not on your own, because the Amish church doesn't provide any help.
Well, I think you've painted a fantastic beginner's picture of what it's like to be an Amish, like within the community and within the religious system. And I can really kind of see some of the struggles as well as that folks have who, like yourself, are wanting to come out and transitioning out. Like, this would be really tough. Not having a more than 8th grade education, language barrier, and I could really empathize with that. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story and sharing what the Amish really is with us. I really appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. I'm so grateful for the opportunity. I just really enjoyed this. Thank you, Eric. And
we're gonna have you on again.
And Glenda. How do you pronounce your name? Kara?
Kara. Yeah, you had it right.
Okay.
It's Kara.
Okay.
I answer to pretty much anything though, so you're good.
So we've got a lot of questions, and
I'm excited. Yes,
we can only do like 2, maybe 3 of them, and some of them might come up if you're able to hang around for the hangout afterwards.
For sure.
Let's see here. So one of the questions is, do the Amish, like, if the Amish were to be in a room with the Hutterites or the Mennonites, would they be able to understand the language? Will they speak the same Amish language?
Not necessarily.
Okay. Great. Short and sweet. I love it.
Excellent. All right. I've got one here. As far as finances go, so there's sort of an image of Amish people selling goods and wares to the outside world. Presumably that's for money. But where does that money go? Is it controlled by men? Are there bank accounts? And what is it used for? Do they buy like modern conveniences, or what happens with that? How does the little economy work?
The Amish, unlike the Hutterites, are capitalists. So the Hutterites are the Anabaptist group that pool everything, in a communist or socialist fashion, whereas the Amish and Mennonites, or at least the more modern Mennonites, I don't know about the super conservative Mennonites, are capitalists, 100% capitalists when it comes to money. Everybody has their own bank account and finances, but it's controlled by the men, the males of the household. Women, except in rare cases, don't have control of the pocketbook.
Now, during this conversation, when we were kind of talking about the Amish, you specifically identified, like you said, we do this, we do that, we believe this. Do you still identify as an Amish? Why do you feel, why did you use that term and include yourself in it?
Because I'm culturally Amish. My heritage is Amish, and Amish is far more than just a religion. It's a language. I still speak the language. It's a culture, and it's a unique group, minority group, and so you can't erase my identity just because I don't wear the clothes and don't subscribe to the religion anymore. And that's
Got it.
part of my, my work and mission in life is to, to reclaim that, be proud of the good parts of our heritage, because there are good things.
Yeah.
and not let the religion, the church, throw us out as that we're no longer part of the tribe, we don't belong anymore.
Wow.
Well, briefly, before we wrap up, why don't you tell us a little bit about the mission of the Amish Heritage Foundation? We'll hear a lot more about it coming up in a future show, but kind of give people a little bit of a teaser and a bit of the mission.
In short, the mission is to empower Amish women and children through education. And that is, alludes to the fact that we don't have, we're not allowed to learn past the 8th grade. And it's also, to provide a support group, a system, a network that people can go to for help, whether they're inside or outside the church. If they need support, they can come to us. And that's something that I didn't have when I escaped, and something that still doesn't exist. An organization that's secular doesn't try to charge you with a religious price tag if you get their services. So that's what we're trying to do through the Amish Heritage Foundation.
And you've created a few courses for some folks too, to kind of understand more about what you're doing.
Yes, there's a course that's a 5-day, what I call the Amish Culture Challenge. So in 15 to 30 minutes a day, in 5 days, you'll know more about authentic Amish culture than 99% of the population. Like, that really is true. So if you really, want to get some facts and insight, take the course. It's totally free. And it's just, amishheritage.org/5-day or torahbontrager.com/5-day. And there's also some videos I created called the 10 Q&As, of Amish questions, 10 days of Q&As that you can find on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Amish Insider. So that should be interesting as well for anyone who
Excellent.
wants to know more.
And I dropped all those links into the
Awesome.
chat, both here and over on Discord too. And they'll be in the YouTube description when this goes on the channel. Torah, thank you so much. Now, before we go, I'd love to give you the last word. Any final thoughts? Anything that we missed you wanted to say?
I can't think of anything. I mean, there's so much to say, but I know I'm coming back again. And I just want to say, if anybody wants to know more, please just reach out to me, ask me questions, text me. That's really like the best way to get a hold of me, to get a response right away. It's just been such a privilege to be on here, and I really, really appreciate it.
We're going to have a hangout afterwards. We're going to go through a little bit of a conclusion part. And if you've got some time, I have a feeling there's a lot of people who want to talk to you.
Absolutely. I'm here all night, as long as you want me. Like, this is
well, folks, this is going to wrap up this portion, or this episode, and we got a few final words to say. So, Kara, this isn't our last RfRx, is it? We got another one coming up?
No, it is not our last. Absolutely not. No, this one has been fantastic. I was so excited to learn about all this as well. This is great. And we are having another spotlight next week. It's going to be one of our RfRx Foundation spotlights, and that will be with Samantha McGuire from the American Atheists. And American Atheists is a national civil rights organization that works to achieve religious equality for all Americans by protecting what Thomas Jefferson called the wall of separation between government and religion created by the First Amendment. And they strive to create an environment where atheism and atheists are accepted as members of our nation's communities, and where casual bigotry against our community is seen as abhorrent and unacceptable. They promote understanding of atheists through education, outreach, and community building, and work to end the stigma associated with being an atheist in America. So I'm definitely looking forward to that one as well. That'll be next week, same time, same place. And just as a reminder, as always, all of the previous RfRx recordings can be found on our YouTube channel, and this one will go up there too pretty quickly. They've been turning these out real fast, so you'll see this one up there pretty soon. And then don't forget also, if you have questions, comments, things you'd like to see on future shows, be sure and email us at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And once again, don't forget to check out our blog and our podcast. Eric's putting all those links in the chat because he is amazing at this. And also we are on all of the social media. So be sure and follow, like, subscribe, TikTok, whatever you do on those other social medias that I'm not familiar with, do that. It really helps us out and, spreads the word about all of the services that we can provide to help people out with. So we are on Facebook. We have a Facebook support group page as well that you can check out. We're on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. I think that's about it. We're also on YouTube, obviously. Subscribe there as well. And yeah, I think that's all of them. We also have the newsletter. Eric, did you want to mention about that?
Yeah, our newsletter comes out every Sunday, and it's all volunteer ran just like this. And so things come up. But the newsletter, when it does come out, we have RfR news in it. We have RfR resources that are recently added to the website or added to the YouTube channel, recent published videos along with the previous RfRx resources and blog posts. It has those kinds of things in the newsletter too. So it's a nice place to get everything consolidated. So that's going to, we could get this final announcement. I'm going to launch a feedback poll. I'd love to hear your opinion on how this went tonight and what how it affected you. And while that poll is running, I want to bring on our founder and president, Dr. Darrel Ray, to give us his final thoughts. Dr. Ray, how are you today, my friend?
Good. And this has been a very big refresher course, Torah. Thank you so much. I went to Friends University, which is a Quaker school for my undergraduate, and we were in a bunch of anti-war protests and stuff with the Mennonites, with the Amish, with the other peace churches, the Brethren and all. So I was rubbing shoulders with all these other religious groups when I was in college. And I learned a whole lot. I learned about Menno Simon, of course, and John Huss and Jacob Hooter, and I don't know. I can't remember them all now. Anyway, I hadn't studied some of this stuff in 40 years probably, so this is a great refresher course. Thanks for doing it. And I'll wrap us up. I won't take any more time, Eric. If you guys want to donate to us, we really could use the funds because we're really expanding big time. We've got some major plans for next year, which include some places in Europe and some places in New Zealand and Australia. We are really seeing a massive growth, especially in Australia. I think I saw 2 new volunteers come in just this week from Australia. And if you want to volunteer for us, you can always do that. And maybe if you're an ex-Amish, you could volunteer and help us help whoever the Amish people are that might need our support.